the year 1847, Punch magazine, the satirical publication that was incredibly popular in London at the time, published a series of cartoons poking fun at the monumentalization of London. There were statues everywhere the cartoons used to laugh about. Everywhere you look, there's another statues. What are we going to do? What should we do with too many statues? And they offered some quite helpful advice typical of the publication itself. The advice was perhaps we could lop off some of the fingers and some of the heads and turn them into ruins. After all, that's what Imperial Rome was all about. But when we walk through the streets of London and we look at the statues that are still here, still from that era representing London when it was at its height of imperial power, what we see is various ways that leadership has been defined and still is defined through the ages. Great orators and speakers, philosophers, people who are visionaries, people who are great commanders. All of these adjectives that define what leadership means. And you can see that in the ways that the statues are erected really in any major capital city, no matter where you are in the world. Just look at the statues and understand what leadership means to us. Well, what I wonder is, have we gradually started to introduce a new adjective in our definition of leadership? And I wonder if that might be that we are starting to see leaders as having to be great conversationalists. People who actually have the ability to engage in conversation with the people who are part of your sphere, with the greater public perhaps, if you're a politician. I've spent quite a bit of time now at Facebook, five years. And 3 of those 5 years have been here in London, working across the Middle East, Europe, and Africa region with politicians and government officials, leaders, diplomats, helping them to understand how to use technology. And the question they're always asking me is, how do I engage with people? How do I have conversations with people? We are expecting our leaders to engage in conversation with us. And I think that's because we have the technology to do it. When you have a global communications platform, or many of them, you actually have the ability to engage at an unprecedented scale in conversation. Leaders understand that we expect them to have these conversations. And likewise, many reports, the National Intelligence Council's forecasting report, the European Union Institute for Security Studies has done a report looking at how people expect to have a voice in political debate, which means that people expect their leaders to actually listen to them. And the internet, the Facebook world, my world that I've been so involved in these past few years is rife with examples of this playing out before us. Christine Lagarde would not run for presidency of the IMF if she didn't have a chat with people online to engage in conversation with them. The Minister for Women's Affairs from Austria, I learned from her staff, regularly invites in focus groups of regular people from Austria to hear their points of view, understand where they're coming from, and adopt some of those ideas into her policies. Having conversations in her office with people who are perfect strangers, but who are engaged with her and want to hear what she has to say. On a recent trip, a very powerful trip to Moldova, I met with a politician who said, you know, every evening I take my iPad home and sit on my sofa and I scroll through the comments on my Facebook page. and I respond to people and talk to people. And I actually quite like comments that even challenge me, because in our country, it's quite special that we're allowed to challenge leadership. And I think it's the responsibility of leaders to engage in those conversations. The European Parliament is one of the most successful political Facebook pages in Europe, even in the world, recently surpassing the million mark milestone of users, of people connected to the page. They regularly run a series, a chat with your MEP series, your member of the European Parliament. Not a speech, not a press release, not some kind of summation of their policies, not even a conversation, just a chat. Being able to have access to your political leaders like never before. And even just this week, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff from the United States of America posted this video on his Facebook page, inviting people to ask him questions and promising to engage in conversation with them. Whether you're a president or a local politician, a diplomat, or a military figure, the expectation is that you have conversations. Now, here's what I wonder. I wonder what the impact is going to be of encouraging and inspiring and even expecting conversation in leadership. Will it start attracting new people to leadership roles because we reward people who actually can engage in discussion and who are willing to listen and willing to hear other points of view? What kind of impact will it have in the long term on people who engage in these conversations and are inspired to be one of these leaders? Well, the book, written by a neurologist and a psychiatrist, Master and his emissary, Ian McGilchrist is the author, argues that throughout various periods in time, throughout various civilizations, we are most successful when we can balance, when we can bring into harmony our right and left hemispheres of our brain. He uses the ancient Greeks as an example of a civilization that very well balanced rule of law with feeling, with emotion, as played out through the dramas that we all read, for example, in school. And he says, you know, at certain periods in time, we do become imbalanced, and we need to correct that course and able to carry forward in a productive way. He fears that our time, the 21st century, is one where we are dominated too much, dangerously so, by our left hemisphere. That we value quantitative skills, that we value rules and regulations and rule of law over creativity, imagination, depth, feeling, qualitative skills that you can't really put a number on, that you can't really prove that they work, you just know. And he fears that, you know, what is going to be our response, our societal response to correcting that imbalance? Well, I can't help but wonder if perhaps conversation, this role that conversation has in leadership, will play at least some part. Because if we demand that leaders listen to people, we're demanding that they listen to ideas. And as we know, anytime you get a number of people from different backgrounds and different places, that you have a flourishing of imagination and ideas, and you can't help but have an increased feeling for others, like these politicians who read the comments on their Facebook pages and tell me stories from them and say, you know, I never would have thought of that unless I had actually been able to see these experiences of people playing out before me. Is there a potential actually that in requiring and asking our leaders to be conversationalists, we're going to be able to increase the harmony between the two sides of our brain that allows us to flourish as a civilization moving forward? Well, the archaeologist and historian, Professor John McHale, has written that a leader who turns outward and embraces a greater humanity, greater number of ideas, succeeds in the long run. It's leaders who choose to turn inward and choose to consolidate their own power that eventually do fail. And it's my great hope, I wonder actually, in the future, as we look forward to the next decades in this very exciting, very connected century, that we're going to potentially usher in an era where it could be nearly impossible to force ourselves to turn inwards, because we're putting so much pressure. We're requiring our leaders to turn outwards, and we're placing so much value on turning outwards that we make it impossible for them to go the other direction. When we value people to turn outwards, we're actually valuing them to be great conversationalists. And I hope that we'll channel this towards positive change. Thank you.